all very much for being here and for the invitation. It's my first time at IPP, so I'm glad to see in person. And I'm really happy to share my work and my ongoing research on healthcare system development with you. So just to set the stage, and before starting, I just want to tell you how I got here at this point and working with these topics. So I am a comparativist by training. I love comparison, and I love large and comparison of social policies. This is what I like. And then in 2018, I moved to Bremen to be part of a very large research project on global developments of social policy. And while I was there, I was the only non-German, not the only non-European, the only non-German. And I was part of this great group, like very smart, amazing experts. But it was very clear that their expectations about what a healthcare system should look like, the models that they use, the theories that they use, they did not speak too much with my own experiences coming from Brazil, right? So I started to do a lot of work about what is the state of the field, asking questions like, how healthcare systems are being studied, which kinds of healthcare systems are being studied, and things like that. So this is what I started doing there in Bremen, first as a doctoral student, then as a postdoc, and now I moved to Barcelona, where I continue working on these topics of global healthcare system development. So what I found out in this checking the scholarship, checking the comparative healthcare system scholarship, I found like there are many gaps, but here I will focus on two. First gap, it's about the introduction of healthcare systems, right? The introduction of healthcare systems is considered like this groundbreaking moment in social policy, because it's the first time that the state takes responsibility for the well-being of its citizens, right? However, most studies that talk about the creation and introduction of systems, they focus on countries of the global north. And like there are many different ways to conceptualize global north, but for the sake of simplicity, here let's talk about Europe and North America, right? Like more like the rich countries, right? So most of these studies focus on the global north. Also, research usually focuses on specific programs that are related to healthcare. So for instance, the introduction of immunization policies, or introduction of specific policies like social health insurance or financing. There is not a lot of research about healthcare systems per se, because healthcare systems is much more than just one policy, much more than just one program. It's usually like a combination of things, right? Combination of institutions and policies and actors. And when you go to the global south, usually what we do have qualitative peak descriptions. They are great, they are super important, but they are not comparative per se, and they are usually not super well systematized. So our theoretical understanding, our assumptions about what's driven the creation of healthcare systems, they are mostly driven by global north experiences. So this is about healthcare system introductions. Then another research gap, it's about global mapping and comparison of healthcare systems per se, right? As I mentioned, I am a comparativist. So I did, together with a colleague of mine, a review of the scholarship about how people compare healthcare system. This has been published, it's Global Social Policy. And we noticed that, of course, the way that people usually compare healthcare systems in large N studies is using typologies. It's like the most used way, right? Like classification tools. And it makes sense because you're talking about large N research and you need to reduce complexity and so on. So then I analyzed 43 different healthcare system typologies that exist. And I noticed, and we found out that 83% of the typologies classify global north countries. 83% of the countries that are classified are global north countries, right? Only 17% global south countries. And these classifications, they are usually built inductively based on the data. So the classifications are biased towards the global north from the very beginning, right? And because of that, these classifications, they do not take into account the particularities of healthcare systems of the global south, because there are particularities, right? So for instance, the very heavy reliance on out-of-pocket payments, that it's much more striking than in the global north. The influence of international actors, right? Like the WHO, the World Bank, major player in healthcare in the global south. They don't take into account that. They also don't take into account something called segmentation that I'm going to dive in later on in my presentation. They also neglect that. And also there is no, at least to my knowledge, no global mapping of the evolution of healthcare systems from the inception till today. So, to conclude, we lack data, analytical tools, concepts, and theoretical assumptions to do proper, truly global comparison, in my opinion. So, this is like what I am going to try to do, right? And in 30 minutes, I hope to answer a few to address some of these gaps. So I divided the presentation. I'm sorry, it's a bit, the size of the font is not great, right? But I can circulate the presentation later on. So I split the presentation in 3 different blocks. Each of the blocks cover one aspect of healthcare system development. So the first block, we are going to talk about timing. When healthcare systems were introduced and how does timing differ between the global north and the global south. The second block, it's about the characteristics of healthcare system at introduction. So how healthcare systems can be categorized or classified at introduction, and how these types differ from the global north, between the global north and the global south. And then, now going towards more contemporary systems, we are going to talk about healthcare system trajectories. And we are going to talk about how do healthcares develop after introduction. Also doing a comparison between the north and the south. So just like very quickly, so all of this data that I'm presenting today, it's contains in this data set that I created together with Achim Schmidt, who is a researcher at the University of Bremen. So it's the Global Historical Healthcare System Dataset. It's online. Achim is now moved on to other things. So now I am the main person building this dataset. And this dataset covers 167 countries. So all countries with more than 500,000 inhabitants in 2018. It covers the period between 1880 when was the introduction of the modern welfare state in Germany till today. So it's like a huge time span. And we have currently around 30 indicators about timing of healthcare system, the policy frameworks, financing of healthcare system, regulation of healthcare system, service provision, entitlement, a bunch of indicators. And it's like a database that I keep reading. And we used to create that mostly primary data, legislation, legislative records, but we also had like a lot of expert consultations, interviews, especially to deal with countries of the global south, where data is much more complicated to gather, and national and international reports, secondary literature, and so on. Just like one clarification here, that this database and my presentation only deals with public healthcare systems, okay? And by public, I mean non-voluntary, okay? So because we do have systems that are private, but they are voluntary, this I cover. It's a bit complex, but for the sake of argument, when I'm talking here about healthcare systems, I'm talking about public systems. That meaning state actors, NGOs, and so on, purely private, like, I don't know, a Tesla, for instance. I don't, how can I say, I don't care too much about that. I care much more about like public systems, okay? So let's start with, I hope, the fun part. So when healthcare system introduced, and how does timing differ between the global north and the global south? Oh, sorry, I forgot to say something. This is mostly what I'm going to present today. It's it's much more descriptive because the data collection took like a long time. So we already finished the descriptive part, and now we are exploring the more explanatory. I will give you some hints about explanations, but the presentation itself is going to rely more on the descriptives, okay? So this is not working. Okay. So, okay, just like very quickly, there is no definition, at least I could not find, about when a healthcare system is introduced. There is no definition about that, and there is no way in the scholarship about how to operationalize. So here, like, I have like these 4 sets of conditions that a healthcare system must necessarily fill out to be able to say here is the healthcare system. I don't think I have the time to go into very much detail, but we can come back in the Q&A, okay? So just to let you know that there is like a lot of conceptual work as well in that. So, okay. So when healthcare systems were introduced. So here, this graph, we have the blue bars are the number of healthcare systems introduced per year. And then the red line is like the cumulative number of healthcare systems, right? So the first healthcare system, so we analyzed 167 countries. We were able to find public healthcare systems in 165 countries. Somalia and Central African Republic are the only countries in the world that we were not able to find any public healthcare system, okay? So the first healthcare system was created in Germany in 1883. The last one was Togo in 2011. So we're talking here about like a huge time span between the first and the last, right? 130 years. This is the important period. Between 1940 and 1980, 54% of all healthcare systems were created. So this is like the period where we have the most activity. Even though it's a huge time span, these 40 years are crucial, like at the end of the Second World War to the 80s. So this presents the same data. I'm sorry, this is not great light, but I can explain to you. So this is the same data, but so you can see, I hope, geographical patterns. So here, the darker the red, the earlier the healthcare system was adopted. Unfortunately, I'm not very great, but let me describe. The first 40 years, it's pretty much only Europe that adopt healthcare systems. We do have some outliers, for instance, Uruguay, that creates the first healthcare system outside Europe in 1910. But it's pretty much in Europe and something in Uruguay and Asia, one or two countries in Asia. Then in the interwar period, between 1920 and the 1940s or something, we see the creation of healthcare systems in Latin America, in the more industrialized countries of Latin America, like Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and in Asia as well. Then, after the Second World War, we saw the creation of the first healthcare system in Africa. So it's very, very late, right? Europe had already pretty much, all countries already had a healthcare system, except I think Iceland. And then, only then, the first healthcare system in Africa was created. So here we can see some very clear regional patterns, right? We have Europe, the most industrialized countries in Latin America and Asia, then the other countries of Latin America and Asia, then Africa. The US and Canada are a bit of an outlier as well. The US implemented Medicare and Medicaid only in the 60s, and Canada was only in the 50s, so it was a bit late. So, here. Okay. So, as I mentioned to you, right, I'm still working on the more explanatory side, but I think these descriptive patterns give us some hints about explanations, right? What it's important to say is that the Global South did not simply adopt created healthcare system later. It actually, the creation of the systems happens in a completely different historical, temporal environment than the systems that were created in the Global North. So therefore, there is this assumption that maybe what explains the creation of the healthcare systems in the Global North, they maybe are not as relevant or maybe not enough to explain the developments in the Global South, right? So no, actually it's me, I'm working this paper by myself. So like I come up with like some assumptions that I'm currently testing, right? So one of the assumptions that I have is that we see a lot of the creations of system at the same time of the independence of countries in Africa and Asia. So there is this idea that healthcare systems maybe be some sort of form of state building capacity, right? So there is like this idea of post-colonial state building. The role of international organizations. When we do have like this peak of introduction of healthcare system, it was at the same time that the WHO was created in the 40s. So like huge pressure of these organizations to create healthcare systems. We can also think about some Cold War dynamics, especially the USSR. They were very into pushing some kind of like ideologies, and the thematical system, the Soviet system, was maybe one way to do that. And also we have like the first diffusions of global norms on healthcare, for instance, the Alma Ata Declaration. So, you wanna try it? So now let's move it on to the second block about, it's working.
Yeah. Maybe you should
So,
change the way you point.
so how can then healthcare systems be characterized at the time of introduction? For that, we created a new typology that I don't have the time to go into detail, but I can talk later on. But like in short, so we classify, we take into account the three main functional dimensions of healthcare system: regulation, financing, and service provision. And we check what is the actor that is responsible for that dimension. Who is the actor that is responsible for financing the system? Who is the actor that is responsible for providing services, and so on, right? So this is what we do. And these are the results. What is important here, how to read the graph. The blue and the shades of blue are the pure types of a social insurance system, right? Where NGOs, or what we call societal actors, they are responsible for financing, providing services, and regulating. The red, it's the state-based systems, NHS in simple terms, right? It's when the state is responsible for everything. The shades that lean towards red, they are mixed types, but it's still the state is the main actor, but they have the involvement of other actors as well. And the same thing for the lighter blue. But we can go into detail later on. But just to give a picture, what I wanted to show you here is that up to the 50s, social insurance was the norm, right? So it was like very Bismarckian, almost like a copy of the German. Then in the 50s, we have a change. And now it's like the NHS, like purely state-based systems that are dominant.
So, just a clarifying question. So these are just the proportions of the introductions of each of these time periods. It's not the overall proportion of healthcare systems.
Yeah, they can at introduction. I think, yeah, sorry, I should have said to you. So the bars, it's like the percentage of the proportion of healthcare system types introduced in that, and it's here it's by decade.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, sorry, should have said that. And then here, I try to do, it's the same information, but it's split by continents, okay? And here, for simplicity reasons, I only have social health insurance, Bismarckian, in blue, and NHS-like systems in red, okay? And here we can also see some regional patterns. Of course, timing is important, but we see that in Europe, there's pretty much social insurance systems. In the Americas, at the beginning, we have like more social insurance, then later on changes a little bit. Asia is a little bit more mixed, but more towards state-based systems, and Africa it's more state-based systems as well. So healthcare systems in the global north, Europe, and there's like more richer countries, they are usually predominantly more in other countries that are more industrialized, especially like for instance in Latin America, they were predominantly insurance-based at introduction, and in the global south, more state-based. And then here I am working with this, in this paper with Professor Hans Holtgang. And we do also have like some assumptions about as to why, right? So the first assumption is about timing. Timing matters, right? Later adopters, they had access to other different types of models to emulate. So the beverage system, right? So there were like more options in the menu that we that early adopters did not have. Also, international influences play a major role. The WHO, it advocates that the state have like a very central role in healthcare. Aid also plays a role. Then we also have like some important factors about countries of the global south per se. So for instance, in the global south, the great majority of people are in the informal labor market. So insurance-based systems are complicated there, right? Because people, they don't have like formal employment. And also we need to consider about issues of like more political issues as well. In the global south, we are talking a lot about newly independent states or more like fragile democracies. We also talk about some dictatorships, authoritarian governments, and so on. So finally, now we go to the present. So how the healthcare systems develop after the introduction, and if the global north and the global south follow different trajectories. Here, the issue of entitlement is central. So who has access, who has the right to access public system? So to set the stage. So this is the logics of entitlement at introduction, when healthcare systems were introduced, right? So I'm going to read I'm going to explain to the people at the back because I don't think they are being able to see. So here we have different logics of entitlement: citizens, mothers and children, the poor, residents, rural population, and workers. So those are like the logics that we were able to find at introduction. Workers, like an occupation-based logic, it's the predominant. 82 countries, when introduced the healthcare system, they introduce for workers. And when I say workers, I'm not talking about all workers. It's usually like a very small subset, right? So for instance, in Brazil, it was only for railway workers. In Germany, for all blue-collar workers. But then we have like some fun cases like Botswana, that the first healthcare system was only for judges. So we do have like different types of group, but usually it's more like blue-collar workers at the beginning, right? So this is like 82 countries. Then we do have like other smaller target population groups that are like the poor, mothers and children, and rural population. And this accounts for 104 countries. So out of 166 healthcare systems that we have in the world, 104 started only for a small subset of the population, while we do have the ones in purple and red, they were born universal, between quotation marks, right? That are for citizens and residents. So here I want to focus on these systems that were not born universal. These 104 countries that start as a target. So this idea is to see like, okay, how do they become or try to become universal? And here we have like two divergent paths of public healthcare system development: expansion or segmentation, right? So expansion. This is more or less what happens in Europe, right? The system starts for a small subset of population, and then over time, other social groups started to be integrated into the same system. So you have self-employed there, then you have white-collar workers, then you have, I don't know, the poor, and so on. So you keep adding different social groups to the same system, and then you end up with one universal system, right? But then you have a different path, which is a segmentation path. The starting point is the same. You start for a small subset of the population, but instead of keeping adding other groups to the same system, you create parallel systems. They are completely independent from each other. They have different entitlement rules, different financing mechanisms, different institutions that regulate. So completely independent from each other. And of course, this has an impact on the quality of care that you receive, right? So the goal is the same for both paths, is to broaden the coverage. But the strategy, it's completely the opposite. And this is exactly what my Marie Curie does. So based on all of that I'm telling you all, so my Marie Curie extend this previous research in these two directions. First, I am doing this global mapping of segmentation. So I am expanding that data set that I mentioned before, adding information on the subnational level of all countries of the world, if they have like different multiple types of healthcare systems. And then in the second stage, it's more an explanatory work where I explain under what conditions segmentation arises and why. Unfortunately, because I'm only one person and I only have 2 years, I will focus only on South America in this part. So for this first part of the global mapping, just to let you know, I started my Marie Curie like less than 6 months ago, so it's still like very early work. But this is like the initial results of the global mapping of segmentation. So I finished cleaning the data on Friday. So it's probably, there are probably some, I will have to go over the data again, okay? So please don't take this by heart. This may change. But from this initial data collection and initial analysis, I found out that there are 43 countries that follow this segmentation path, which is a lot. They are mostly in the global south, mostly in Latin America, even though the US as well, but mostly in Latin America, Southeast Asia, some in Africa. But this is not a phenomenon exclusive of the global south, right? As I mentioned, the US, but Portugal, Spain, and France, they also have segmented systems. So very initial result. So to wrap up and to conclude, so where I want to go from here and what I am working on at the moment. So a lot of my time, my resources are like to expand this data set. This is like something that's very important to me. Currently, I have data for the introduction of healthcare systems and current systems. So I need to have like a complete time series. I am adding information about the subnational level with my Marie Curie, and I'm also adding information about the generosity of healthcare systems as well, like more outcome data. I am also moving from the descriptions to explanations, right? As I mentioned, up to this point, it was mainly descriptive work. So now I'm working on like 3 different explanatory papers. And my particular focus, it's more about this issue of segmentation. I am really interested in issues of inequality of access. So yeah, so this is what I'm doing with my Marie Curie and hopefully in the future. So thank you very much. And yeah, I appreciate any comments. This is all the references. Those are all my publications that I used to inform this presentation, and these are all the other references that I used. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Very interesting. It's really nice to see the overall map